All right, guys. Hey, what's up? Welcome to Lean Green Dad Radio. And today we have Evolving Alpha, at least one part of Evolving Alpha, Mr. Fraser Bayley. What's going on, man?
Hey man, it's a pleasure to be here, dude. Finally. We
Yes,
can,
yes.
yeah,
We've been trying to connect for a long time, so I really
yeah.
appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, so thank you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
So, listen, for a lot of people, they're familiar with you and the vegan movement and everything that you do as far as you're helping people get, fitter, stronger, mind, body, soul, everything. But
Yeah.
for those very few that don't, fill us in, man. Let us know in a snapshot, like who you are, who is Evolving Alpha, who is Fraser.
Man, it's kind of multifaceted, I guess. It's like, how long do you have, right? So in a nutshell, I guess, it's just been a strange evolution. That's really, I think, in many ways, I'm sort of like a series of paradoxes and almost like bizarre happenings where in my early life, I was a butcher, had a lot of mental illness, really just, it was like, I was a different person back then. I've looked at pictures and videos of how I interacted and how I spoke and things, and I don't even recognize that old person anymore. But I feel empathy for them, but at the same time, I appreciate them because that was a catalyst for where I am now. So, Evolving Alpha, I mean, the whole brand Evolving Alpha is basically like we're trying to evolve what it means to be alpha, like what it means to be a leader in a modern society. So typically in traditional, tribal societies, alpha is seen as the one who hunts, who is aggressive, who dominates. We want to try and rebrand that, from a perspective of compassion and changing paradigms and habits and rituals. So, dude, I mean, veganism, strength training, just, personal development. I love all that stuff. That's the stuff that I live off, and just enjoy sharing my story, and hope that, hey, if I can tell people about my journey through mental illness and butchery and all these other issues, and I was conscious enough to see the signs that, anyone is capable of change.
And when did that connection happen for you? It's like I talk about this so often with other people that it's like,
Yeah.
we can have our dogs and our cats and not even think twice about eating a chicken or eating,
Mm.
a full, piece of pig or cow or roasting these things. And it's kind of one and the same. And I feel like once you make that connection, you just can't go back, and
Yeah.
it's that connection that's not happening. And I don't think it can be forced on someone. I think it's something that you have to go through yourself. But what was that process like for you? You're a
Yeah.
butcher and you're working on these things. You suddenly start to see it differently. Like what was that? When was that?
It's funny because a lot of people sometimes think that these changes happen. It was like one pivotal moment where everything shifts. Sometimes I also think it's like a cascade of moments. So like, it's like one thing after another after another. It's like a compounding effect where you might notice one little thing, but you're still missing the other 10 pieces of the puzzle. And then you get another piece of the puzzle and you start kind of making more and more connections. And so for me, all I knew early on, like the challenge is that I was a butcher for about 6 years in my teens through to my early 20s. But when I left butchery, I still didn't go vegan straight away because I was still entrenched in a lot of mental illness. And the challenging part for me when I was in that place was I could barely function and look after myself, let alone contemplating the well-being of another being. And
Hmm.
so like that, it was that sort of tunnel vision.
Right.
But one of the things I did know that forced me to get out of the butchery was I knew that it was a toxic environment. The masculinity, the mental illness, the addiction that was like rampant within that sort of ecosystem was intense.
Wow.
And you saw it amongst all the people who worked there. They all had some degree of dysfunction, addiction to some extent. And I just knew that like, it was getting worse for me. Like when you wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning and start crying because you hate your jobs so much that you just don't know what to do with your life. Like I was in that place. And so the first step was leaving that. But really the pivotal moments, I think, and like you were saying, you can't really force someone to have this moment. But for me, I think what drew it out was a lot of personal development. So like, being a bit of a personal development junkie and wanting to improve myself, I started, recognizing a lot of patterns in my life and a lot of ways of thinking. And I think that really led me to seeing what veganism was. And I remember when I finally made that connection, it's funny because now I look back on some of my old Facebook memories, and I had glimpses of veganism back in me a long time ago, but it was like under the surface.
Yeah.
So like I shared an image of a mother pig with a piglet, and they were nose to nose, and it was like a really beautiful moment. And I remember why I shared it, because back in New Zealand there was a big court case going on about a mother that had beaten and killed her two young children. And I said, if only like humans could have the same love and compassion as these animals do. And I said that at the time, and I didn't make the connection that like my meals that I was eating were full of that suffering. And when I look back at that, I'm like, man, so much has changed. So much. So I think for me, it was like a series of cascading steps, like reading a certain book, having a certain epiphany, seeing a certain Facebook memory, and you start to connect it, and it's like a snowball. It just starts to get its own momentum. And I think that's when the door to veganism opens up,
Was it weird for you at first because you kind of like have that moment, what am I going to eat? What the heck am I going to eat? Right. And
Yeah.
you kind of starve yourself, or you're like eating rice and beans all the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
I still do that. I mean, I still eat rice and beans all the time because I love them and they're just great.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what when you first started, was it that slow transition, that slow education of like what to actually eat?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's crazy because my wife Lauren is not. She was never a big meat eater to begin with. So for her, veganism was easy. She was already eating a lot of plant-based foods anyway. Whereas with me, I was like a meat-eating fanatic. I cringed when I say it now because I realize the unconsciousness behind that. But it is what it is, right? Like I share it, the vulnerability to say, hey, like even a butcher who was like an avid meat eater can change and enjoy it. And so like for me, it happened over a period of about 3 or 4 weeks where I'd already stopped consuming dairy, man. Like that was probably one of the first things I stopped consuming a long time ago, because I'd started picking up on the things about it put me off it. And I was never like, I sort of moved away. I was never a big eater of like cows or pigs because I don't know, I just wasn't, but it was like mainly chicken and fish and eggs. And I found that rather than just stressing out being like, man, like what am I going to like eat? I started adding things in that would crowd out the old foods, as opposed to just like removing something and then having like a big void there and being like, what do I put here? So I would start adding in lentils and quinoa. I remember I used to hammer quinoa. Like that was like the first thing I just did, like for every meal, quinoa coming out my brain. And so I would add in all these other legumes and lentils and beans and chickpeas and things. And I would eat enough of those that it would slowly crowd the other foods out. And I remember the day that I fully just let go. It was about 3 weeks into this process. And I never had the straightaway attention of like, I'm going to go vegan boom. Like it was like an instinctual thing. Like it just resonated with me. And I knew that it was like, okay, it's time now. It's time to do it. Like there's nothing holding me back. It was like removing 2 eggs from my post-workout meal. And that was it. And it was so effortless. I just felt like I stepped off this bridge and I was floating. And it wasn't this like big scary leap of faith that people think it is.
Yeah.
And afterwards I was like, damn, is that it? And I was thinking to myself, God, like, I wonder if anything bad's going to happen, like in terms of like how I feel and look. Dude, nothing bad happened at all. If anything, all these good things happened. And as I went along the journey, I'm like, oh my God, like nothing negative is happening at all.
Yeah.
And I'm eating all these fine, and I actually started eating more foods, more diverse foods. Dude. Like I started, because it kind of forces you be more aware of like food diversity. And I think that's a good thing.
What what's your daily regimen like? I know that listeners always want to know, okay, like,
Yeah.
what do you eat, on a daily basis? Like, for me, I don't typically eat breakfast like immediately. I will wait a while. I'll have like um I love this green juice that I make. Like, I'll have a green juice or something. Like, if I'm headed to the gym in the morning, which sometimes I'll do, not as early as you, but sometimes
Yeah.
I'll do like a beet juice, like a red beet juice with like some berries and stuff like that. But then I do the lunch and the dinner thing. I don't really think of like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's just kind of like
Yeah.
you just go along. But what's your thing? What's your routine?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm typically a creature of habit, but what I will do is I tend to rotate foods just based on instinct. So, you know, I train in the morning, like we were talking before the show started. I'm an early morning person, so definitely, tend to get up around sort of 5 a.m. I don't set an alarm; I just try and wake up naturally, but I tend to wake up naturally early anyway. Um, and then what I will do is I go train. The one thing I do use, because I train in a fasted state, so I'll use branched chain amino acids while I'm training. But other than that, I don't eat before I train. And then afterwards, typically it's usually like a smoothie, and I love doing like things like kiwis and grapes. I find that post-workout, man, like, the vitamin C from the kiwis, and just like, the fact that the grapes, they digest so quickly, so they, enter your system fast, which, post-workout can be a good thing depending on your goal. So it's typically like, some fruits. Sometimes I might do some rice cakes with hummus. I just find the hummus sort of satiates a little bit. And then typically what I'll do is I'll work, I'll do a vegan nutritional programming all through the morning. And then I'll have like my first main big meal at maybe like 2 p.m. Like you were saying, like, I don't have, like you don't have like a breakfast at 8 a.m., a lunch at 12, and it has to be bang, bang, bang. It's like I shift my meals around my energy state and around like my list of to-dos. But I still make it a priority. Like, it's still important, but I don't like make it the epicenter of my day. It's there to sort of like allow me to create energy, to perform between those times. For lunch, it'll usually be something like tempeh or tofu with rice, and I normally do like a huge bed of like greens and carrot and pickles and tomatoes and things like
Like a
that. So
bowl? It's like a
yeah,
bowl.
dude, it's like
Yeah.
a bowl. Yeah, so like I tend to, in my head, it's like layers. So like the bottom layer is like all your fibrous stuff. So it's like all the colored fibrous vegetables in the bottom, and I'll go crazy on that. Like, I'll really like add in a lot of those things because I
Yeah.
like that food volume. And then I'll do some brown rice or some, basmati or jasmine or something on top. And then at the top of that, I'll do sort of tofu, tempeh, chickpeas, lentils, things like that. And I'll throw maybe a bit of garlic and onion in there as well. And then between meals, again, I'll have like some fruit as a snack. And then typically, man, like my dinner is kind of similar, but what I will do, instead of having like a sort of a salad, like a cooler fibrous base, I'll do like some steamed broccoli and green beans as the base. And then on top of that, I'll do the rice or quinoa or couscous, and then the other stuff on top. So it is pretty like standard. Like, I don't get overly creative. I mean, sometimes we'll do like smoothie bowls and things like that, or you know, but all in all, banana and ice cream, for example, we'll do stuff like that. But all in all, it's pretty much like fruit between meals, and or sort of, rice cakes, or veggie sticks with nut butter and hummus. And then those bowls that I said. I love macro bowls and stuff like that. So, for like a macro bowl, you basically have your components of each meal. So you can, in your head, you can kind of, it's very easy to adjust it
Yeah.
based on goal. That's why I like it, because in my head, I'm like, okay, if I'm trying to lean out more, I'm going to double up on the fibrous vegetables and just pull back on a little bit of everything else. So the food volume is still the same, but the caloric load comes down a little bit. Fat loss.
Yeah, see, yeah, explain that to me, okay? Because if you're trying to bulk, I was
Yeah,
gonna ask, okay, calorie wise, do you watch your calories? And I think the answer to that is kind of like, well, it depends on your goal, right? Everything depends on your goal. Like
context.
if you want to gain muscle or gain, any kind of mass, obviously you have to do the right type of training, but then the way that you eat and the certain things that you eat are different. I don't
Yeah,
know. So explain, I guess, the difference. And you got programs that talk about all this. So folks, you
yeah.
got to go check out
Thank
evolvingalpha.com,
you, man.
check those out. Well, and we'll talk about those in a minute too.
Yeah,
But talk to me about the difference between, trying to lean out and trying
yeah,
to bulk up. Can you do both at the same time? I know our buddy
yeah,
Jeff Morgan, he
yeah,
was trying to do that and he
yeah,
struggled at the beginning. But,
yeah.
talk about that
And
for a second.
so the first thing, like what Jeff did is pretty much what's called like body recomposition. So with body recomposition, typically what you'll find is that it's achievable in a certain type of people. So it's achievable in total beginners. It's achievable in people who have come off an injury and they lost some muscle mass, but they had the base before. It's achievable in someone who has been training a certain way and they kind of hit a plateau, but now they've changed their training systems that have like forced them to like a new level. And so like I think for Jeff, it was like more like coming off a hiatus and changing his training,
Mm.
which allowed him to body recomp. If you're like more advanced and you're already sort of at your training capacity, it's much harder to recomp. Like I wouldn't really be able to recomp where I'm at now. I would have to pick one or the other, but you can do like microcycles.
Hmm.
So you could do like 2 to 4 week bursts of deficit and surplus, even down on a weekly level. So body recomping, think of it as like a tightrope walk. It's more of a fine balance because you can go either way too much in a surplus and you'll gain body fat, or you won't lean out, and too much in a deficit and you won't gain muscle mass. So as long as you stay within the middle a little bit and toggle a little bit on either side of that maintenance level, which again, you have to kind of figure out where your maintenance level is, which is another challenge in itself. But you can definitely body recomp, especially for people who haven't done a lot of weight training before and they're new to it, or they've come off a break. Those people typically like hyper responsive. In terms of like just muscle building or fat loss, the cool thing is that not a lot really has to change. The only thing that really changes between the two of them is your total caloric intake. That's really the main thing. There are smaller variables, like sometimes the way you train might change. You might do a little bit more heavy lifting, low volume stuff when you're in the bigger surplus because you can recover quicker because you have more nutrients to help recovery. When you're in a deficit, you do lose a little bit of that micronutrient density. So your recovery can be a little bit slower. It's not to say that it's slow, but it's slower.
Right.
And so you can't necessarily handle as much of the volume and stuff. So you can't just be dependent on training to get you lean. You have to be more diligent with your diet. So the only thing that really changes is your total calorie intake. So like what I'll explain to people is like that explanation I just gave you before about my daily diet. I'll give you an example. Like if I was in like a true mass building phase and I really wanted to focus on strength and those types of things, I would still have my fibrous vegetables because you always want that, obviously, right? But I would be adding in more hummus, more avocado, more nut butters. I would be going a little bit heavier on the starch portions, more
Because the
rice.
things that you're mentioning are higher in calories, right?
Exactly, dude. So that way you get the total calorie intake up without adding more volume in.
Yeah.
And all I would be doing when I'm cutting is I still need that volume to feel some degree of satiation. It never works 100%, but it's like a buffer. So you would pull down, your fat, especially the fat portions tend to come off first because it's 9 calories per gram. So it's very calorically dense. So you can strip away even 50% of what you're doing and you drop 100 calories, right? So say instead of doing, a whole small avocado for lunch, you do half of one, and straight away you might drop by 100, 200 calories.
Mm.
And then you take you add a little bit of extra green fibrous vegetables in. So your food volume, the total weight is still the same, but it's more calorically shallow. And that's really the difference. That's only the difference. You don't really have like bulking and cutting foods. You just have ratios. And as long as you pull the calorie dense things down a little bit and increase the calorically light foods, which tend to be the good stuff anyway, all your colorful fibrous veg, increase that, and you'll start to get into a fat loss zone. Equally, increase the dense stuff, and you'll be into more of like a mass building zone.
And there, when it goes to the workouts, there's I forget what this is called, but there's a specific type of training that you do where, like where you're holding the bar and you were doing those squats until you just couldn't do them anymore. I remember a video of you just like doing squat after squat after squat. And I forget what that type of training is called, but it's not just to failure. It's something else, right? What is it?
Like, I mean, there's a couple of different methods. And I mean, I know that Jeff uses some of them as well. So there's drop sets, and there is, like German volume training is the type of training where it's like 10 by 10. And that really takes you to the limit. Like you literally have to be getting like close to mechanical failure on that 10th rep. And that's tough, dude.
Yeah.
The other thing that I use a lot is rest pauses. So rest pauses are where you push out a set of whatever the target weight is. You rest for about 5 or 10 seconds, and then you do as many more as you can.
Wow.
I actually found that a rest pause is probably the best way to facilitate strength and growth out of all those techniques, because you're not just relying on adding in tons of extra volume. Like, with drop sets and supersets, you add in a lot of volume, which forces growth, but there's only so much of that your joints and ligaments and body can handle before everything stiffens up. And so with rest pausing, it allows you to hit that max without actually going to failure, which one saves your nervous system a little bit, right? And also helps prevent injury. So that way you're not taking it like to full on mechanical failure where injury zones happen. So like, I'll give you an example. Like if I'm doing like I'm trying to think of like a deadlift. And you'd have to be careful because obviously you don't want your form to break down to the point where injury happens, but you might hit whatever your max effort is for 10 reps, you do that. And then you rest for 10 or 15 seconds and you push out another 1 or 2. Normally you would have stopped, but that extra 1 or 2 is the overload. That's where the most change happens. And people forget that. They think that the first 10 reps are like all really important. That stuff's important, but you need to fatigue the muscle to get to that mechanical overload. And then the last few are the magic. So,
yeah. That's a big way to think about it. I mean, most people don't think that strategically when they get into the gym, right? It's just they're 8 reps and they're done, or they do their 10 reps and they're done.
Yeah.
But I think when you're starting off, that's good. When you're first starting off and you're like, okay, I haven't worked out in a long time. I'm trying to get my body used to working out again. Do your 10 to 15 reps, call it a day.
Yeah.
Do 3 sets of 10 to 15 and then call it a day. But then once you get more specific, when do you increase the weight? How much do you increase it? You don't want to go much more than 5% or else you're looking at injuries, stuff like that. That's all very important. And I'm assuming in your programs, like all of that's in there. Yeah.
Yeah, so like we factor in all those things. So periodization, so the rep ranges change because you can't keep hitting like heavy max effort weight every week.
Yeah.
You have to undulate things. So like it's what's called periodized, where it allows for cycles where you peak and then you deload and you kind of recover and then you peak again. So all that stuff is definitely, I think it's important. Like as a beginner, that stuff's not super, super important. Like you were saying, you could get into the gym and just hit your 3 sets of 10 and kind of push yourself a little bit and you'd see results. But once you get past those sort of real raw newbie gains, which last for a couple of months, then the periodization, then the all those other things will really make a huge difference in terms of your progress.
Did you call them newbie gains? Is that what you just called them?
Yeah. So the newbie gains is like when you basically like in the gym and you just like look at a weight and you just like grow from just looking at it. Like, dude, like the newbie gains make me jealous because I see like these people in the gym and I'm like, and they transform so quickly. And I'm like, and they're not even like putting in like a huge amount of effort, but it's
Yeah.
because they're so far from the genetic potential.
Yeah.
I'm like, damn, man, you know?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Newbie gains. That's great. I want to get some more newbie gains, but
Newbie gains,
you
man.
can't get newbie gains when you aren't a
Intermediate.
newbie. Yeah.
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 Oh Lord. Okay, so with let's talk about you for a little bit and
Yeah.
what you got going on in your programs.
Yeah.
There's three things that we talked about when I saw your site. Where are those three things? I wrote them down. Hold on. There's three things. Okay, eat, train, and inspire. We talked about eating. We talked a little bit about the training and the
Yeah.
inspiration. Talk, how does that weave into your programs? And then talk to me about the programs overall.
Sure. Look, like with inspiration and inspire, it comes in many forms, and like one of the things that we often talk about is, in regarding veganism and a plant-based diet and stuff like that, is be a walking billboard. It's one thing to say a certain message, and there are a lot of effective advocates out there who aren't necessarily in amazing shape, but they're just very good with the way they articulate their conversations. But I often think to myself, you'd be even more effective if you were like super, like you don't have to be like jacked like a gorilla, right? You just have to be like healthy. And obviously you do want to define healthy, but so inspire is basically like becoming the strongest form of yourself. And even if it's just inspiring your loved ones to make some form of positive change, you don't have to go out there and like change 50 million people. Like, and that's not to say that you can't do that, but I think inspiring starts from like the grassroots. And I'll give you an example. Like we recently just went back to New Zealand to visit my family for the first time in 4 years. And my brother, who I love, a lot, he is a year and a half younger than me, a single father, hardworking. He's a carpenter, so he builds houses. Lives in a small town in New Zealand. So being small town New Zealand is not congruent with like veganism or plant-based diets because people don't even know what that is. And the second thing is that being in that industry, veganism is not a thing either. But he was like all in. Like as soon as we got there, he was eating all the meals that we were making him. He wanted to go grocery shopping with us. He wanted to learn. He's been sending me pictures on his phone of all the stuff he's been making. And for me, like to inspire that change in him, and I never once forced him. I never pressured him. I never told him like why he should do this and like and gave him the negative associations about it. I just let him do his thing, and he found his way here. And for me, inspiring could just be changing someone you love. And so like for me, that was a massive fulfilling thing in my own life, like seeing him make that vegan switch. Just so proud of him. And if that's the only person that I inspire to change, I'm happy. But I know that by putting ourselves out there on social media, like you do with your podcast and what you do and with what we do, we're putting ourselves out there as an example. And so for me, inspiring people, it's not just about like how much weight can you lift or like how many abs do you have popping out. It's actually less about that. And it's more about like how much value are you adding to other people's lives? How much are you actually giving other people with no expectation of return? That's the caveat, is like how much are you giving without expecting back? And so for me, I go into the Plant Strong Fitness group every day, and my main thing is like, where is the biggest value I can add today with these people? And I'll go in and I'm commenting in people's posts and I'm replying and I'm giving value and adding things. And I very rarely like get salesy or push our programs. In fact, our other clients tend to come in and do that for me because they're like, man, this person needs like my help. So they're kind of like the warriors for us in a way. But inspiring, dude, it just comes back to like being, like a good parent, a good sibling, a good husband, a good, whatever it is. But I think leading people into veganism and plant-based diets and stuff, because I ultimately truly feel like it gives you so much more than just a diet. It gives you, as I'm sure, like, it gives you like a way of thinking. It's a paradigm shift. And I think you start to see the world completely differently. And I think it makes you a much, much more cognizant, conscious person.
Yeah, I agree. The compassion that you feel
Yeah.
just overall
Oh,
for anyone. I mean, it's so easy in
totally.
life. You're driving down the road, someone cuts you off. It's easy to just start screaming and yelling and just get yourself so upset. Yeah, flick them
Yeah.
off or whatever. But, just to take a second and just think about maybe that person's got something else going on. Maybe
Yeah.
they're on the way to the hospital to see a loved one and they're just not really thinking about other people around them right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that is a true compassion that I think all humanity could use right now,
Yeah.
especially with not to get all political, but our
Everything that's
president,
happened, dude. Yeah.
the way that he is and everything. It's just it's just one of those things. You
Yeah.
wanna be able to step outside of yourself and be
Yeah.
aware of other people around you. And
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, that a lot of vegans should always remember as well, that it's not just compassion towards animals, it's compassion towards your fellow human.
yeah,
And so like you giving them respect and understanding where they're coming from, like we talked about earlier on, like context, right? Context is everything, man. And just being that shining light in a place where it can feel kind of dark at times, I think that's just super important. So that's inspire, man. That's what it means.
well, I mean, we've got these people though that are in our community, our vegan community, and they're
Yeah.
just like very aggressive.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I just want everybody to know that like not all vegan or plant-based people are like that.
Most people aren't like that, man.
It's so tough.
I think the loudest ones tend to get the most attention,
Yeah.
and then the people who are inherently more compassionate towards other people are the ones who are not as outspoken. And being outspoken in this society tends to give attention.
Mm.
And so I think it's usually the ones who are the loudest. And it's just one of those things, man, like you were saying, like not everyone is like that. We don't get together in some vegan meetup and everyone is holding hands. Like there's a lot of vegan people that like I wouldn't be friends with. I respect their decisions, but I wouldn't be friends with them because they're not on my wavelength.
Right.
And it's just like anything. It's like it'd be like going out in public. Like you're not going to be friends with every single person that you meet. And so veganism is the same. And I think everyone advocates differently. And I don't think there's inherently like a right or wrong way, but I definitely feel like understanding someone's context. Like I feel like when you can understand human psychology and you can understand the art of selling, because you're selling an idea, you're selling a concept, whether you realize it or not. So if you can hybridize the psychology of understanding people with the art of sort of selling, you become an effective advocate because you meet people where they are and you're not quick to judge. You're quick to ask questions instead.
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey man, good stuff. We gotta give a shout out to everybody for listening in, and I want to make sure that we tell them where they can follow you.
Yeah.
So let us know that for sure. Where can we follow you on the website? Where can
Yeah.
social handles?
So yeah, first off, I wanted to say thank you for having me on, man. I mean, it's been a fun conversation. It's gone too quick. But you can follow us over at Facebook. If you just search Evolving Alpha on Facebook. We are also at Evolving Alpha, one word, on Instagram. Or you can go to our site, www.evolvingalpha.com. Or you can email me, Fraser, at evolvingalpha.com. So
Awesome.
those are our main places you can find us hanging out. So
Amazing.
yeah.
Dude, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time.
Pleasure, man.
We'll keep in touch, and I'll definitely be wishing you all the best all the time, man. We're in this thing together, so anything I can
Yeah.
do to help, let me know.
Thank you, brother.